Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another video. So we just got Andor episode 4, and I've got to say once again, Tony Gilroy is setting such a high bar for good writing on a Star Wars TV show. I love this one. And just as it got going, it ended. I was so fully immersed. Now this episode was packed with Easter eggs, references, and larger connections to the Star Wars universe, so let's cut the jibber jabber and dive straight into the breakdown. So once Luthen and Cassian depart from Ferrix, they head for the planet of Aldhani, where Andor is being assigned to Velsatha's small group of partisans. Andor is told by Luthen that he's got to take on an alias, and he chooses the name Clem, which was the name of his adoptive father who he saw in flashbacks, and who was hung by the Republic years prior. When Luthen and Cassian are speaking on board the ship, Andor mentions that he fought on Mimban. The Mimban campaign was first referenced in Solo: A Star Wars Story and took place in 10 BBY, which would be 5 years prior to the events of this show. It is heavily implied that Andor was part of the Imperial Ground Forces, which means he would have fought directly alongside Han Solo, who, as we saw in Solo: A Star Wars Story, was a swamp trooper. I've got to say this was a really unexpected connection, and actually something making Star Wars revealed in a scoop a few weeks ago. It's a really nice tie-in, and just like Han Solo, Cassian questioned the Empire's intentions on Mimban and fled. On board, Cassian also questions what is exactly powering Luthen's ship. I think it's safe to say, based on a few hints in the episode as well as the TV spots, that it's probably kyber crystals. And I've got to say, when it comes to Luthen's past, there are a lot of question marks that emerge. Not even Vel is willing to tell Cassian. He is ultimately a man in the shadows, helping the early rebellion, but his entire story and motivations are to some extent in question at this stage. Now Luthen gives Andor his Quaiti signet, and it's partly made of kyber, and Luthen says it comes from the days of the Rakatan invasion. This is a very deep-cut reference to an ancient war that took place between the Infinite Empire and the Jedi Order, which were the predecessors to the Jedi. The Rakata, also known as the Builders, were a humanoid amphibian species. They were a warrior savage race who would use the dark side to power their advancements. The Rakata terraformed worlds to fit their own needs. They enslaved, murdered, and wreaked havoc upon many planetary systems. Now, apart from the blue kyber, Luthen also mentions the signet is made up of skystone, which was a type of stone used to train Jedi in telekinesis. They were powerful tools of both the ancient and recently fallen Jedi orders. It would be very interesting to learn how Luthen, who is clearly also a collector, got his hands on this. So then we cut to Coruscant, and it was so amazing to see it again in live action. We see the inner workings of the ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau, and for the most part, it's very clear to see how pompous and self-satisfied this group is. Now in this scene we hear a variety of familiar planets referenced. We hear about Ryloth and Scarif, but then Officer Legret gives an update on a certain conflict taking place on Arvala 6. For reference, Arvala 7 was the planet where the pirates were keeping Grogu in the Mandalorian Season 1, but we'd never heard of an Arvala 6 before. It's probably just a quaint reference for fans who caught it, but it'd be fascinating if at some stage they do mention Arvala 7, and maybe give us a clue as to what took place earlier in the timeline during a period of time where we don't know where Grogu was. Now, in the ISB, as Denise Goff teased, Dedra Meero is having a very hard time fitting in. Her colleagues are extremely condescending, and due to the failures of the Primors on Ferrix, Blevin has been put in charge of the case, but he doesn't have all the information that Dedra does. She realizes that it's not just a case of theft, but rather a larger spy job on behalf of the early rebellion, and at this stage, she's not taken seriously yet. But we know from the trailer that eventually, her perspective is heard. For the time being, Cyril Khan returns home to his mother on Coruscant.
You're demoted.
And Luthen leaves Andor with Vel on Aldhani. And speaking of which, the partisans are not very welcoming of Cassian. They never heard of him before or even met him. They're naturally skeptical, but eventually agree to take him on. Not that they had a choice in the first place, because Vel calls all the shots. And despite her initial reluctancy to take Cassian on, Luthen convinced her. Their goal is to infiltrate the runway by the Aldhani garrison, which is a depot for all the weaponry and payroll for the Imperial sector. Behind the flight deck of a Max 7 mono freighter, there is a vault, and their aim is to take crates of payroll from that vault, load the freighter, and escape out of the runway tunnel. As Cassian states, the only problem is, it's a suicide mission in terms of danger. The chances of survival and success are very, very slim, but it's a risk that the partisans and Andor are willing to take. And so now, my dear friends, we cut back to Coruscant. Luthen runs an antique shop and has a different public persona. Mon Mothma, who knows about Luthen's real identity and is part of the early rebellion circle, just plays along, but secretly she's working with him. At this point in the show, she hasn't left the Imperial Senate yet, but the Empire is getting suspicious of her actions. She goes into the shop to speak with him privately, but for the sake of not looking suspicious, she uses an excuse. She's looking for a gift for her husband for his Day of Days, an old Chandrilan custom. Now, the sheer amount of Easter eggs and familiar items in Luthen's gallery is astonishing. We see Jedi and Sith holocrons, Mandalorian armor, a Wookiee warrior's helmet, a Twi'lek Kalikori, a Kashyyyk Clarion, the One's hand sign from the World Between Worlds in Rebels, Starkiller's helmet, and even a non-Star Wars Easter egg, Indiana Jones's whip, encased in a carbonite block, basically honouring Harrison Ford's two most prominent roles. But the one gift that Luthen suggests for Mon Mothma's husband is an Utapau and monk cudgel. Now, this is really significant because if you think back to those rumoured plot leaks from a couple of months ago, the OP did state that Utapau would feature in this show. Now, I wonder if he saw the cudgel and maybe a few bits of armour and made the assumption that we would see Utapau, unless of course it is still coming. Let's wait and see. There's a planet I would love to revisit. So back at Mon Mothma's apartment, her husband, who she's been married to since she was 16, is preparing for a dinner party with some old friends. When Mon Mothma scans the guest list, she says the names of Ars Dangor, who we first meet in James Luceno's Tarkin novel, and she also mentions Sly Moore, Palpatine's chief of staff and the right-hand person to Masamida, who is also referenced as the Vizier. Now, if you remember guys, my one exclusive scoop for this show months ago is that Masamida is going to be appearing, and it looks as though that's going to come to fruition at some stage. Just wait and see. My source was very confident on that one. Now, overall, this episode moved the story along to where we need to be for all of our protagonists. The world that Mon Mothma knows is collapsing before her, and she realises that her public face of going along with the Empire's wishes is not going to last forever. For Cassian, he's at a defining point in his eventual journey with the rebellion, and he's got a very daring task the following day. Luthen is finding it difficult to manage everyone in what he calls his circle, and he's also realising there's a lot of work to do if they're going to be able to pull off everything they want to without the Empire noticing. And on the Imperial side of things, Dedra is working out what's going on beneath the surface. I just love the suspense that the show's building up to. And as I said right at the start, the writing itself is brilliant. A captivating TV show so far, and I've got to give this episode a solid 10 out of 10. Once again, the acting was next level, and I really can't fault anything. The story is unfolding how it needs to. I'm loving the journey, and that's pretty much all I've got to say on the matter. But what did you guys think? Did you enjoy this episode? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video.